Okay, hi. How you guys doing? Um, that was a thing, right? That was a hell of a game. Um, yeah, I'm also not super okay. I'm uh I we maybe we're all yeah, okay, we're all pretty broken up. I'm not surprised. I think that was good. That was really it was a well done ending. It's a hell of a story. And for the complaints that I had in parts of it about the smoothness of the puzzle design and little glitches and things, I mean um, the way that it pulls together interactivity and storytelling at the end is fantastic. I mean, it's really striking um, and powerful. It's weird that we're all cutting onions at the same time. I agree. That's an incredible coincidence. That's pretty amazing. Um, if anybody does anybody have anything that they want to talk about or questions that they want to ask? Because I mean I'd be happy to try to power through that. Otherwise, we can do a proper Q&A at in the next one next time. Um, what were your thoughts on how quickly it changed from a standard puzzler to a really strong emotional story? I think I don't think it was that sudden. I don't think it was such a quick change. I think it may have been exaggerated by the way that we sort of the way that we played through it, the way that we split it up into sort of episodes and um, over a few days, and the way that we were sort of talking about it as we went through. It was, I mean, the very first scene of the game is the mirror to that very last scene of the closet, right? And so from the very beginning that there's something darker and more profound to this story than what is being presented in the magical world that you enter. Um, and then I really do think that the game does a good job of giving you a good long stretch in the magical world and then breaking that up with this kind of black and white flashback to another world for a brief moment. And then you're in the magical world for a while, and then you get another flashback that's just a little bit longer and a little bit more. It's the one where the father standing in front of the car and his shadow projected against the wall is the shadow of Monster. So we're starting to see those two worlds blend, and then from there it's just it happens a little more frequently, and the blending is a little bit more uh, there's more overlap between those worlds. But I don't think it suddenly changes from one thing to another. I think it does a good job of sort of mixing things together and gradually coming to a really emotional place. Um, we had Lula's death, and then shortly we had Alejandra's death, and then quickly into the ending. Um, I never knew Alejandra's name. Uh, Again, I think that's partly because of how we split it up. We stopped playing immediately after Lula's death. And then we played the whole rest of the game all at once. I think that was probably a good third of the game at the end in terms of content. And maybe not. Maybe not. No, I think it was, because the first episode that I did was real short. And then I did a long one, and then so I don't know. It felt like that was a substantial portion of the game. It's just, I think the fact that we played it all at once sort of exaggerated that effect. The idea of splatting frogs sort of changes when you think about it in terms of bottles. That's a good point. I didn't think about that. Who did Lula represent? So, I mean, in a literal way, Lula was a robot toy that Kiko had, that Kiko played with. I think there's a story, there's an escapism story here, right? There's kind of a story about Kiko trying to escape from how shitty his life is into fantasy, and the game represents kind of the climax of that, the zenith of that. I think Lula represents the first stages of that. That's him playing with his robot. His robot will protect him because when he's by himself playing with his robot, he doesn't have to interact with his dad. He doesn't have to be a part of the household. He doesn't have to, walk on eggshells and fear for his fear bodily harm the way that he does when he's in the real world. When he's playing, he can kind of be safe. And I think that's the safety that Lula represents. Oh, Stock, I may have missed part of what you said. I agree. I think the game was really well paced. I agree with that. Yeah. Yep. This is a super, really emotional game. So what happens to the dad in reality? Kiko let him go in his fantasy world, but how do you think that translates into the real world? Like I said, I think that's open to interpretation. I have to say, the sequence where I was getting bottles and feeding them into the pipe, and they were coming out as frogs, and I didn't just do it once, I did it multiple times. I did it until Monster passed out, and then I pulled a lever that pushed him over a cliff. That wasn't the last sequence in the game, but that sequence felt a lot like encouraging somebody to drink themselves to death. And the way that Monster does end, I mean, he goes through a couple of different stages. They're like literal levels, staged areas. When he goes off of the last one, when the caterpillar sort of drops him off the cliff, that looks like he's not coming back. That looks like not just I am running away from home. That looks like one way or another, the the father is dead at the end of it. That's my interpretation. Was this based on someone specific or only a general sad story representing terrible things that do happen to people? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. That's, I mean, I'm sure that is findable information. I did in an earlier episode or Q&A, or at some point I addressed the fact that this feels like an autobiographical story, and I think it is designed to feel like an autobiographical story. Whether or not it is actually autobiographical, I have no idea. Oh, clothing change. Okay, so yes, not including the body paint. What's your take on clothing change throughout the game? Nice uniform to just shorts through various stages. Is that a metaphor for them getting poorer over time? Yeah. So I don't know exactly. I mean, so a couple things. Several people have brought this up. And I think it's come up in chat a bunch of times that I've missed. I have seen it a couple of times, I think, in a couple of the YouTube comments and on Twitter. I just keep forgetting to talk about it in the game because I keep not seeing it happen. And I think it only happens 3 times, including the body paint. I think that when you first encounter Alejandra, and she, instead of welcoming you, sort of pushes you and calls you cursed, you lose one of your shoes. And then the first time that Monster becomes enraged and grabs you and throws you around, you lose, I think, maybe your other shoe and your shirt or something. I know there are a couple of points where you lose items of clothing, and I remember seeing at one point that I only had one shoe, but I do not actually remember, like I did not notice in the moment when it happened that it was happening. Regardless, like that's obviously an intentional choice that they're stripping you of clothes over the course of the game, and then you put on body paint. And I think even if I didn't consciously notice it at the time, it's the sort of thing that has an unconscious effect, a subconscious effect on what you're seeing when you play the character, and how you're interpreting the character. I have a couple of different theories. One is that the most obvious thing is that it's simply sort of a health tracking system, right? That there's not a health system in the game, in the sense that like you can't do things that cause you to lose health or gain back health, and if you lose health, if you lose too much health, you die or something like that. But I think the character does, within the metaphor at least, you can make an argument that the character is losing health over time. I mean, in that first encounter with Alejandro, when he gets pushed off of a building, you could read that as he's sustaining some kind of a damage, metaphorical or psychic or whatever. And the first time that he gets tossed around by Monster, he's sustaining some kind of damage. So it's tied to the story rather than actual health system as we normally understand it, but it's still marking that kind of status change. Similarly, I think you could make an argument that it's about vulnerability, that clothing is something that we interpret as very part of us, like it's core to our identity, And so stripping somebody of clothing is makes them more vulnerable, and makes them look more vulnerable, and makes them feel more vulnerable. And empathically, when you look at him and he's got one shoe on, you sort of, you have a sense memory of that. And I think the emotion that sort of is tied to that sense is vulnerability. And then I think, as was mentioned, the other thing that it could be is poverty. Is that it represents Kiko and his family's decline into poverty as his father's alcoholism gets more and more out of control. Have I been involved in the full development of a game or just testing game design research? Oh God. What just happened? Okay. My screen just went blank. I don't know what that was. So I haven't ever been involved in the development of a AAA game. Or even like a AA game, what would be called as a AA, or so there's AAA, like we can kind of all agree on what that means. That's big budget blockbuster games, multi-million-dollar budgets. There's kind of an emerging market of AA games that are much smaller in scope, but are typically polished close to the same degree that AAA games are, that have much smaller budgets. They're what are being called triple I games, which are so indie games with larger budgets and a lot of production value. And then there are, much smaller indie games. So I've been involved in indie games. I was involved in a game that was nominated for the IGF a few years ago. I've been involved in games that were nominated for Indiecade, so smaller indie games. And then I've been involved in the production of games for research. So, for example, Futurebound is a Futurebound and Futurebound, Graduate Strike Force, Mission Admission, Application Crunch that's a suite of games that I developed with a team at USC that are all based on improving college access for middle school and high school students. But they're real games, they exist, they're playable. I don't know that if you're not the intended audience, that you would have a blast playing them. I mean, I'm not gonna recommend them for everybody, but we tried to make them fun as well as having a learning objective. And then the game that I did that was in IGF was called Spectre. That was a sort of story platformer that was directed by a friend of mine, Jamie Antonise. So it's a tough question. I have definitely made games before. I've made games that have been distributed and that have gone on to be recognized. But I haven't made a big budget game. I haven't made a game for a publisher. So if those are your criteria, then I haven't done that. Yeah. Thank you, Idle Satire. They are real games. I also know they're real games. I appreciate that. Life is Strange might be a little wordy for mostly walking, but would you consider doing it as a solo stream sometime? Definitely. So I want to talk it over with Sean and Bill. Because when that stream crashed out, Sean and I talked for a few minutes about the fact that the game looks pretty cool. But I don't think it's right for mostly walking, so I don't think we're gonna go back to it for mostly walking. If that's the case, then I'm definitely interested in doing a solo stream of it. So we'll see exactly how that plays out. But if we don't do it on mostly walking, then like if we rule it out, if we decide that it's not going to be on our list, then it will definitely go on my list. Other cool emotional game experiences. That's tough. I mean, so basically I'm just going to reach back into the last year or two, because I think I've had a lot of emotional game experiences. I like emotional games. I like sad games, especially. That's my jam. So definitely like games kind of like this, like at this scope, that I've found powerful. We talked last time about Brothers. Brothers is a great game and has a good emotional punch. Gone Home, I love. I think that's a really good game that has a strong emotional component. Bigger games, AAA games, a lot of BioWare stuff. A lot of BioWare stuff can be sort of hot and cold. Sometimes it doesn't work and can be off-putting, but most of the time it does work, and then it can be extremely powerful. Actually, one of the things that kept coming to mind when we played this game, Papo Yo, is the interstitial sequences where it's in black and white and we're running through the street following this line, and it's very dreamlike, and we're sort of chasing after this bad memory. Reminded me super strongly of Mass Effect 3 and some of my favorite sequences in that. I mean, not favorite sequences because they were very similar. They're very short. There's not a lot to them, but I thought they were placed extremely well, and they reinforced the story of this soldier who is not coping well with extended battle fatigue. I thought that was one of my favorite parts of Mass Effect 3, that it sort of told that story, and it used a very similar device to do it. I found that really powerful. Oh, Last of Us. Oh my God. Last of Us and the Last of Us DLC. If you haven't played that, those are both really fantastic. After a sad game, what do you do to re-equalize? Oh God, that's a good question. I think there's a pretty decent chance I'm going to go watch a Disney movie. Because I kind of need some of that right now. Like maybe I'm just going to put on Tangled or something like real light and like solid. Do you think that video games have recently started to be taken more seriously by academia and cultural studies, especially? And if so, what do you think this will, in the long term, do to affect the industry? I think absolutely there's a momentum to video games being taken more seriously as a cultural study, as an academic pursuit. I think that's, there's a bunch of reasons for that, but the net result is I think there are a lot more people like doing that work, thinking about games critically, thinking about them as part of culture, and that in turn informs developers, especially at this moment. I mean, we're at this like really magical time right now where the tools that you need to design games are becoming more and more accessible, and the platforms to distribute games are becoming more and more accessible. And the sort of, fairy tale of anybody can make a game and put it up on the App Store and sell 1 billion copies we're recognizing. Oh, Jesus. I don't know. Are you guys seeing when my screen completely blacks out like that? I don't know what that is. We're seeing that there's something sort of untenable about like you can just make an indie game and make $1 million off of it. But it's certainly true that more people than ever before can make an indie game and can put it somewhere that more people than ever before can access it. So it's the problem is a discovery problem, not a distribution problem. Which means that if you have alternative discovery engines, and we're seeing things like blogs that cater to different communities and recommend games to different communities, that kind of thing, then all sorts of different people can make all sorts of different games, including the kinds of people who study games as cultural artifacts or as as media or as storytelling devices, or however you want, like all of these different academic pursuits. The people who are in academia, the people who go through academia, the people who are just influenced by academia, I think this is a great example of a second order effect. I am heavily influenced by the fact that I exist out of a university. My understanding and interpretation of games, the way that I think and talk and do this kind of analysis of games, is heavily influenced by that and by the things that I read and all of that. And there's a lot more cultural critique of games available for me to read. And so then I have a conversation with my friends, or I have a conversation with you guys, and that kind of becomes part of the conversation, right? The academic theory behind interactive design, or the cultural theory behind interactive storytelling, becomes part of the conversation that we have. And so I don't know that there's an immediate effect that like, in fact, I'm sure that there's not. AAA games are not going to change overnight. And the landscape, what's going to change is the landscape of the games industry. We're going to see it broaden. We're going to see there being more options, different kinds of games made by people who have a different background, different influences, thinking about games in lots of different ways. I'm really excited about that. And they're going to start with small games, because small games, small budget games are less of a risk. And so they can be produced much more easily. But I think eventually, in a couple generations of game designers, the people who grew up playing those small games, and reading blogs about that cultural theory of games and doing all of that stuff, those are going to be the people who are making AAA games, and so that it will have an influence. I think. What do you think is the key difference between JRPGs and Western RPGs? I can't really answer that question because I don't think I've played enough of a representative sample of JRPGs. I've played a few, but I've played a lot more Western RPGs, and so I know that genre a lot better. I think, and so any sort of conclusions that I draw about JRPGs, like the differences, I think you could point to counter examples really easily that I'm not aware of. I have played some JRPGs that I love. Persona 4 was such a great game, for the most part. I had some problems with the dungeon crawling, and I had some serious problems with the ending, but I really loved that game. So I'm glad Sean played this game. I don't think I could have handled it by myself. I don't know if I could have handled it by myself. I'm glad that you guys were here. How do you think this... Oh, God. How do you think this game compares to a comedy game like Katamari regarding the relationships between the main character and the father? They're depicting quite different relationships. There's a distance in both of those relationships. I think there are qualities that are similar, but I think fundamentally those relationships are quite different, and obviously the games are quite different. How do you think this game compares to Katamari? I think it's super interesting that games like Papo Yo and Katamari are interested in exploring that relationship. And that's something that we see in more mature media a lot more than we do in games. There are so many movies, there are so many books that are about the relationship between a father and a son, which is great. I love those stories. I eat that up. That's fantastic. But there are so many of them. There aren't as many in games, and so I think you can point to a couple, and they really stand out from everything else. But I think as games mature as a medium, and some of that is the sort of thing that I'm talking about, that as different people with different influences have more and more access to that medium, being able to make games, and as those influences then filter out into a wider community, I think we'll see more and more games that are about the relationships between fathers and sons, or parents and children, and that kind of thing. I think if we weren't here, you would have definitely stopped before the bottle and the pipe. Yeah, I don't know. There's a good chance. I think at the very least I would have sat here for a while longer. I probably would have stood up and walked into another room, and maybe stopped to cuddle with my cat before I came back to finish that off. Because I don't know when the last save point was, and I would not want to have to play through any of that ending again. So then it would be like, do you finish it or do you never finish the game? And it's a challenge. I have to finish the game. So. Do you think emotional gaming could actually play a role in imparting strong moral messages into children as they grow up playing different games, in a potential sense rather than a current sense? I mean, yes. In the same way that I think that what you read and the TV that you watch and the movies that you watch can also have a strong role in defining your sense of morality or your sense of justice. And I mean, I don't think that they define that to the exclusion of everything else. I think there are lots of things that influence that moral sense. But I think the media that you consume, maybe especially the media that you consume as a child, has an effect on that. I think games are absolutely a part of that. That also doesn't mean that, like, if you watch... This is so weird how my screen keeps going off. I don't know how to troubleshoot that. I also think that doesn't mean that, like, if you watch an age inappropriate movie when you're a kid, it's gonna, like, warp you and corrupt you. I think, there are lots of games that don't have strong positive senses of morality, and playing a game like that as a child isn't gonna, like, turn you into a sociopath. But I do think that the media we consume influences us. Could emotional games be a good way to do so? Yeah, absolutely. Like, the counterpoint to that is, I think, one of the things that we actively try to do with kids, I mean, certainly in the United States, is as we take them through public school, we have books that we want them to read because we think that those books are important in establishing, maybe not a sense of value, but something like that we have kids read books that we consider classics or important, because we believe that having kids read those books is going to influence them. And certainly privately, families will share things like books or movies that they think express their values because they want to pass those values on. Okay, so do you know what game you will be playing next? I don't. This is maybe the last time. I'm gonna go eat dinner after this, but I need your help. So here's my plan: is February. I've done Papo Yo. After this, I'm gonna do what was I gonna do? Stanley Parable, Hotline Miami, and Half-Life, the original Half-Life. I've never finished any of those games. I've actually never... I've played like 35 minutes of Half-Life, and I played the demo, like the pre-release demo of Stanley Parable. But I've never... other than that, I haven't played those games. So what should I play next? I'm actually a little worried. Like, none of those are Katamari Damacy. None of those are going to be like a real fun time. But yeah. Stanley Parable, Hotline Miami, Half-Life. I'm seeing some votes for everything. And I plan to do everything. I just don't know what I'm doing next. Stanley Parable, probably one stream long. That's true. That is true. It might be. It's possibly a couple. It depends on how long. Stanley Parable is fun. Yeah, no, it definitely. I totally know that. I'm looking forward to that one. It's just not going to be. It's not going to be a Disney princess movie. And that's what I need right now. Hi. Did you want to say hi, kitten? You probably didn't, but I'm gonna make you. Meow. You say meow? No. Come here. Come here. Come here. No, you don't like any of this. You don't like this at all. Okay, fine. Adorable kitty is Shiro. Oh, shoot, straw poll. Thank you. Let's do a straw poll. I'm going to pick one. I'm not going to tell you what it is. Okay, I'm going to keep this up for a minute. Bill used to live with a cat. Sean Plott now has 2 cats. I have 1 cat. Bill used to live with a cat, but I believe that his current living arrangement is catless. I think. The something about a grip meter. Oh. Have I? Oh, Shadow of the Colossus. Okay. I'm going to tell Shadow of Colossus story while you guys do this poll. So, Shadow of the Colossus is great, right? It's, fantastic, whatever. I couldn't do it. I couldn't play it. And for me, it's more... so I didn't play it when it came out. I did not have a PlayStation console. I didn't have a PlayStation console until a couple years after the PS3 came out. I got a PS2 so that I could play Persona 4. And I also got, I borrowed from a friend Shadow of the Colossus and Ico or whatever that game is. Couldn't play either one of them. I just couldn't. The pacing was wrong for me. Shadow of the Colossus has a weird... Some people are like really, really into the story of Shadow of the Colossus, and I just really don't get it. There's too much. They drop you into a world where there are monsters and there's this girl and she's dead, but maybe she doesn't have to be, and I don't really know who she is. I'm not sure why I care that she's dead, but I guess I'm gonna kill some monsters, and I think the intended experience of the game is that you start out really gung-ho, like, let's go kill some monsters, this is going to be a lot of fun, and the more monsters you kill, the more it starts to weigh on you that, like, what am I doing? How, like, this is there's something terrible about this. And I just started out feeling like, this is terrible. What am I doing? This is terrible. And so I got through I don't know, 3 or 4 of the colossi, and then they started getting harder, and I got frustrated with the the difficulty of the interaction with them, because there's a lot of performance and not just like puzzle solving. And so I would fall off of them a lot and like fall into the water and then have to climb all the way back up again. And so I couldn't do it. In the end, I couldn't do it. I watched a friend of mine 2 or 3 years ago play through just about all of Shadow of the Colossus, certainly through the end, while I was up at GDC, staying with my friend Daniel, and some other people, and they played through Shadow of the Colossus, and that worked for me. Like, it was, I enjoyed sitting around and watching it. I admired the skill that they brought to the game. I could sort of take it when I wasn't being asked to actively do it, and just let somebody else make the decision to keep fighting giant monsters in order to save this strange woman's life. I appreciate the arc of it. I think it's a beautiful game. It didn't work for me, and that happens sometimes. Not Echo the Dolphin. Ico. I'm just gonna call it Ico. That one I also had trouble with. Although I think that was really more of a generational thing. That was the aesthetic of games at the time that came out, especially those kinds of games, like games from Japan in a particular sort of tradition. I wasn't used to that. That's, by the time I played it, that's not what games were like anymore, and I just had a hard time getting over that hump. I should probably give it another, like, I should play Ico again, and like actually try to finish it. I think that would be a smart decision for me to make, but it's not something I've done. Okay, so looks like Stanley Parable is the winner. Awesome. I look forward to Stanley Parable. This is gonna be fun. I don't think I can manage to do it tomorrow morning. I've been trying to figure out if there's a way that I can do the live stream earlier in the day some days, just to like change it up so that people in different time zones have a chance of seeing it. And I was thinking about trying to do it tomorrow morning, but I have stuff I need to do tomorrow that I don't think I can do that. So gonna try to stream again tomorrow night, and I will announce on Twitter when that's likely to be. But in the meantime, I am going to go watch Disney movies and cuddle with my cat. So thank you very much for being with me in this trying, difficult time through the ending of Papo Yo. I thought this was an amazing game, and I really enjoyed playing it with all of you. So thanks again. Have a good night.